Good afternoon. I welcome you all to this interview, all protocols observed. This afternoon, I have the pleasure to interview a renowned scholar, Dr. Sheila Wamahiu, a director of Nairobi-based Jaslika Consulting. She has worked as a senior consultant, researcher, and manager in more than 20 countries, a majority of which are in sub-Saharan Africa. Previously, she has worked with UNICEF Uganda as a chief of education and New York as an education specialist, and in Women Educational Researchers of Kenya work as a coordinator and a founding chair, and Kenyatta University as a faculty member and chair of the Department of Development Studies. A gender and human rights expert, Dr. Wamahiu's interests in values, justice, children, and human rights goes deep and is reflected in both her academic and non-academic work. She has put substantive work with FAWE to promote the rights of adolescent girls and women through her research, writings, and advocacy work. Her technical coordination of the African NGO education inputs into the Beijing conference in 1995 and the post-Beijing events on its behalf, under recognition and nomination as a member of the Outstanding Educator category. In Uganda 2009, the Ministry of Education officially recognized her for her contribution to the development of basic education in the country. Dr. Wamahiu has, to her credit, several pioneering research studies, including the education of the girl child in Kenya and a study on children in the streets in Nairobi. However, her most recent research has focused on values in the education system in Kenya and positive deviance in primary education. She has a doctorate in education from Kenyatta University, Nairobi, Kenya, and master's in anthropology from Paizam University in Islamabad. Dr. Sheila, I hope I pronounced that correctly. You would excuse me, please. Thank you. My name is Becky Isanda, and I'm a lecturer at Kenyatta University, Kenya. I'm also a member of Jaslika Consulting, and I'm honored to facilitate this interview. Thank you. This morning, as I've already mentioned, Dr. Wamahiu will be sharing her experiences, thoughts on the relationship between values, education, and human rights, drawing on her research and scholarship. Thank you. I think Dr. Sheila, those few words of introducing a renowned scholar allow me to go to the interview. Thank you, Dr. Wamahiu. You are an expert in value-based education, and your study on value-based education in Kenya, for example, was a very influential study that informed education, policy, and even the new competence-based curriculum. But you have also done research on children's rights, protection issues, and on girls' education and gender equality. You kindly tell us what is the relationship between values, rights, and quality?
Thank you so much, Dr. Isanda. And good afternoon to everybody. I am happy to have Becky interview me for this talk. Now, moving very quickly to the question that you've asked, that is, what is the relationship between values and rights and equality and education? The way I look at it, the values are at the heart of human rights and sustainable development. It is also at the heart of quality education, because people define these terms in different ways. But to me, they're all very much interlinked and dependent on one another. I'd like to maybe highlight 3 points about human rights, because human rights is universal. There's some core rights that apply to everybody, wherever they are, whatever they do, wherever they go. Human rights are applied to all equally without discrimination. Human rights are also inalienable, which means it is inherent. We are born with rights. You cannot take away our rights from us. I know many governments do that. They try to restrict our rights, but it is within us. So you really cannot take it away. It is our entitlement. So even attempts at taking it away are contravening our right as human beings. The third point about human rights that's important for our discussion here is that human rights are indivisible. So we cannot say one right is superior to another right. The human rights, we have to look at it from a holistic perspective, that all the rights make us who we are, what we are entitled to. Now, values underlie these rights. The rights are anchored in the values. Let's say, for example, the universal values that are based on our shared humanity. And if we look at values from that perspective, we could say that positive values, I'd like to emphasize, our shared humanity is a positive value, it's a positive principle. Values and principles are very closely linked to one another. But I'd like to differentiate between positive values and negative values. Sometimes when I go out to give talks in different places, I think, Becky, you'll remember,
Yes.
The first time I did a talk at the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, and I talked about positive values and negative values, and they were like, no, there's nothing called negative values. And so I'd like to take a bit of time to explain what I mean when I'm talking about negative values. At its simplest, at its simplest, we can define values as something that we find is worthwhile. Something that is worthwhile and desirable. But when we look at that definition very critically, we need to ask ourselves whether the negative values, all values, what I think is important to me, is it also important to somebody else? Is it worthwhile for somebody else? And more importantly, it is not even what you perceive to be worthwhile. You might think it is worthwhile for me to step on somebody's toes, right?
Yes.
Because you're bullying. You want to step on somebody's toes. To me, that's important, right?
Yes.
But if I step on somebody's toes, am I not infringing on the right of that other person?
Yeah, sure, you are.
So while I value being violent myself,
yes,
it is not something that is helpful. In fact, it's harmful to others.
Yes.
So when we're talking about shared humanity, we have to consider that. So the values that contribute to our shared humanity are what I, in my own conceptualization, consider to be positive values. So and values that will contribute to peace and do away with, break the vicious cycle of violence.
Yes.
So positive values are those that promote that, if I may say, the pathway to peace, the pathway to living harmoniously with each other, the pathway to Ubuntu. In Africa, we talk about Ubuntu.
Yeah, sure we do.
So that is the pathway, the togetherness.
Yeah.
Without impinging on the rights of others, because there's a way we can impinge on others' rights as well by putting too many restrictions in the name of, oh, because we have to do things together. That is also not shared humanity. And we know many governments do take advantage of that to restrict our freedoms, our fundamental rights and freedoms. So values is what underlie that enhance our dignity as human beings. So if we put that conceptual framework in place, then we can see the values that are not positive. Let me give another example of success. In our society, and not only in the Kenyan society, globally, these days, we talk about success. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be successful, right? Everybody, all of us want to be success. But how do we define that success? What are the values that underline that success? And we've seen many examples in this country and other countries, whether it's in the Americas or Asia or Europe. We have seen that success has increasingly become, we look at success as something that we must achieve by hook or by crook, and that success is linked to wealth. So what is happening? The income inequalities are increasing, with a very few people who have everything in the literal sense. They own 90% of the world, almost. Not only this country, but at the same time, others who have nothing. The majority have nothing. And that kind of a success is not a positive value. In the same way, if you look at the education system, this certification culture, examination culture that we have here and many other countries, where it promotes competitiveness in a negative way, so that there's a lot of, we've seen examples of cheating. To get A grades so that you can get into to good secondary schools, you can get to university, but not through working hard, but through cheating, taking shortcuts to get that. That again is not a positive value. So it's very desirable. My parents, for example, if I were a child, value good results
and a good education.
And a good education, but they don't bother with how we are getting there. So the values that underpin that success is negative, the way it is applied. So that's why I'd like to differentiate between positive and negative values. And what I'll be talking about is on positive. When I use the word values, I will use it positively, but keeping in mind that negative values exist. And that is what has caused a lot of pain in this world. It has caused, it's even being amplified now during the COVID pandemic, our negative values, rather than our positive ones. But I think it's the positive ones that will take us forward. I hope I've explained your question. Okay, the other thing I want to add, because you asked what is the relationship, I've explained the relationship between values and human rights. But also we must remember that values is at the core of sustainable development. Because if we cheat and get things through corruption, will the society be sustainable in the long run? No, we are creating more and more violence. We are creating enmity. We are creating bitterness. So we are not building our structures. We are building a bridge, but engineers are building a bridge, and these engineers have gotten there by cheating. So the bridge collapses. To take a very extreme example, you have doctors who have gotten degrees that they don't actually deserve. No, I'm not saying that all doctors are like that. They're wonderful doctors, but there are many. So what happens? We've had cases like those in the media here in Kenya, where I'm based. So eventually, if you add all that up, can we really achieve sustainable development, we are destroying our environment because we're not respecting our environment. Again, that greed is the motivation for, destroying. It's hunger as well, but that hunger is being created in the first place by the greed, by not diverting, utilizing resources to bridge the inequities and
Yes.
investing in solid structures and solid strategies. But instead of that, we are taking away whatever resources we have, we are taking it away. So it's creating a development which is really an underdevelopment in the long run.
Okay.
So I hope I've explained your question.
Thank you. Sure, you have. Thank you, Dr. Sheila. At least we have learned that values, rights, and quality are intertwined, and they will lead to one result, a positive or a negative one. Thank you very much. Would you like to let us know how you got interested in values and rights?
Well, I think the issue of values and rights, I think it's in my genes. Now, I don't mean genes in a biological sense.
Yes.
I'm talking about my social genes. It's something that I grew up with my parents, the values that they demonstrated, the values that they practiced because they were advocates of human rights and democracy and women's rights. So I grew up in an environment where I had parents who believed that every human being is equal. It does not matter where you come from, what religion you belong to, what ethnic group you are. We are all equal. And so I must say my values were molded by them. And as you know, early childhood is a very formative period in our life. So we started with that. If I may say and acknowledge my parents, because they risked their lives to save others. Because we had, I come from South Asia, what is now Bangladesh and Pakistan. I mean, all over South Asia, you still have that problem where you have people fight, internal conflicts because of religion, because of ethnicity. And I remember growing up where my parents would personally risk their lives to save and rescue Hindus because we were a Muslim majority country and there were riots. Anytime something would happen in India, where there were riots or Muslims were attacked in Bangladesh and Pakistan. Well, Bangladesh, I can't talk about Pakistan because I was in Bangladesh at that time. You would find some people retaliating. And eye for an eye makes everybody blind.
Yeah, sure.
So they would risk their lives with their friends, have rescue centers, and in their homes. I mean, it didn't cost money. If somebody has a house, you open it up. You go and you rescue Hindus who are being attacked so that their life is not endangered. The property might get lost, but at least the lives were safe. So having role models like those, I think I had no choice but to be interested in human rights, in values, because the values they instilled in us was values of tolerance, values of justice, values of equality, among others. And also now when I went to school, and I'm a Muslim, as I mentioned to you, I went to Catholic school. And in that Catholic school, they also reinforced the commonness, not the difference between Muslims and Christians, but they reinforced that we are one humanity. And we do have our differences. There's nothing wrong in being different. We're all different. No five fingers are the same. So, but they emphasize that there should be unity and diversity, and all of us have our strengths. which we must build on. So I think that was another influence. And like I said, I grew up in an environment at school, at home, where people from different cultures and different religions and ethnicities influenced me to become what I am today. So I think it was I was also an inquisitive child in terms of research now, because research is about asking questions. And I remember being very much influenced by the story of Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, Gautama Buddha, who was a prince. And he left home. He left home because he saw misery, he saw inequities in his society. So he left home and went away to find an answer to the question, why is there misery on this earth? Right? I mean, the rest of the story I'll just talk about the story up to the why is there misery on this earth? And I think as a researcher, that question why is very important. And I like to find answers to the why. Why are there inequities? Why is there discrimination? Why is there xenophobia? And I think trying to answer these questions is what led me into research on values and human rights, whether you're talking about it from the gender perspective, or you're talking about it from an ethnic perspective, or the differences in social status. And of course, now my focus is more on education, so within the education sector as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much for walking us through that journey and for opening our eyes that our parents and our schooling, all of them are model for our values. And on that note, I'm wondering, I would like actually to know from you, how then do we start a conversation? Where does the conversation start? Is it home? Is it in school? And who should initiate it?
I think the conversation has been going on for a long time. There is a conversation because when you open the newspapers, you listen to the media, people are talking about values.
Yes.
If you look at the Kenyan constitution, yes, and I'll take that as an example, and there are many others in different parts of the world, the constitution talks about values. But I think the problem is not the conversation, the problem is the action. If you go to schools, teachers will talk about values. But we just keep on talking and we don't walk the talk. So triggering conversation, it is there, but how to trigger that meaningful conversation in a way that can change what we do. That is the problem. How do we bring down the rhetoric that is embedded in our textbooks, to some extent, embedded in our constitution, in our policies? Because if you look at the policies in Kenya, there's a lot of talk about values. Competency-based curriculum, they have a pillar, what they call the, for those of your people who are listening in, yes, what I'm talking about in terms of the competency-based curriculum. Kenya is under education reform. Yes. Moving from a more exam-oriented, cramming kind of a system to what is being described as a competence-based curriculum, and it has 3 pillars, and values is one of those pillars in the curriculum. But the issue is how are the values being actualized? Yes. How are they being taught in our schools? How are they being communicated? The teachers were supposed to teach values. Yes. Do they know, or are they still feeling overwhelmed? Yes. Those are some of the challenges. to answer your question, I think
Yes.
the conversation is there, but now we need to do something to treat that conversation towards more action instead of
Yes.
talking.
Yes.
And I believe we can do it
Yes.
because I believe that as an educationist, researcher, and a development professional, if I say I cannot make a change, then I have no business being there. Because to me, I know the different definitions of perspectives on education, but I do believe if I'm in education and I'm in development work, then I must do all I can to push towards positive change. And I can give one small example, if I
Yes.
may. Uh, if you remember the trainings that I run on values,
Yes.
not only on values, any research training, even on girls. You remember the training that we did, on value-based education, but also on girls' education.
Yes.
And I like to start off every training by trying to find out what are people's values, what do they believe in, and do it in a way that gets people to think critically.
Yes.
I remember that time when we had a certain activity, and generally a lot of people don't know I'm Muslim, and they have a preconceived ideas what Muslims look like and how they behave, which is part of the ignorance that fuels, let's say, in this particular context,
Yes.
Islamophobia, and
Yes.
it can also trigger other kinds of, it can trigger sexism. When you are ignorant about certain things, or you have a certain mindset. And I remember people were really surprised because they were saying things freely. They were saying things freely about Muslims. They didn't realize I was one, but it was good that they didn't know I was a Muslim because they were able to talk freely about it. And not only that, there's so much of prejudices that we have. And by trying to get people to express their value, their perceptions on
Yes.
other people, and the stereotypes, by revealing the stereotypes, we're able to tackle the
Yes.
problems. And we can promote or get people to start thinking critically, which is the first step towards going towards positive values of inclusion, tolerance, and other related values.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much. We have learned that we can actually be able to initiate the values at all levels, at home and in school, and even have a conversation with ourselves. Thank you. Would you kindly share with us then how did you go about collecting data on values? Because this was a groundbreaking research. There hasn't been one of that kind in Kenya.
Okay, you're referring to the research that I did on the National Study on Value-Based Education, which was a
Yes.
huge study. The sample was about 12,000 plus,
Mm.
but it was a mixed method study, which
Yes.
means basically that we did a comprehensive perception survey,
Yes.
which was more quantitative, of 5% of all primary schools in the country.
Yes.
And then within that, we interviewed the school leaders, that would be the head teachers, the school boards of management. We interviewed teachers themselves, surveyed them, and we also talked through the survey to child leaders, because Kenya has a system where
Yes.
you have children's governments in the schools. So we were able to interview one boy, one girl for the survey. The survey, though as vast as it was, and most of the sample was coming from the survey,
Yes.
To me, that was not the most important part of the study. The more important part of the study was the qualitative methods that we used. And we used a variety of qualitative methods. We used consultations, like we had consultative workshops with civil society organizations, with the religious communities. We had, throughout the study, we engaged with institutions like I've already mentioned, the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development. So that was one part. We also did key informant interviews, where we picked informants both from public and private schools, but also from international schools, just to see how are they doing implementing values, if they are at all, and what kind of values. We also talked to, in this category, we talked to even teacher training colleges. Not many, but we did include teacher training colleges. We included key informants, again, from the religious communities. So we had this category of key informant interviews. Then, in addition to that, we did case studies. We did 25 case studies throughout the country, and the case studies were selected using what in research we call purposive sampling. Well, to some extent, convenience sampling, because of resources, we were not able to purposefully sample the schools from throughout the country. So we picked the schools from counties. Counties is like, in some countries you'd call them like, well, smaller than a province, but something between a district and a province, or a district, and it's like a state really, but not so big. So Kenya has 47 counties. So we picked counties from around Nairobi, where we are based. And this study, so it included counties like Kajiado, which is a semi-arid area. We also did, we did go outside Nairobi, where we had researchers already present, like in Eldoret, which is a town. And then we have, we have, which ones? Kiambu counties. So there are a number of counties that we covered. And the focus was mainly on primary, but we did do 2 secondary, post-primary, not secondary, but post-primary. One private, and one was post-primary technical institution run by Catholic missionaries. So in these 25 case studies, we looked at them, we immersed ourselves for a week in each one of these schools. And we became part of the landscape, so to speak, because we were there with them as they started the day, as they ended the day, talking to the children, talking to the teachers, talking to the school administration, observing, sitting in the classrooms, sometimes playing with them in the playground. So we were able to actually get a good feel of what was happening in the schools. Now, why did we go? Before I move any further, I must say, and I must acknowledge that this research was commissioned by Women Educational Researchers of Kenya, and I was very fortunate to win the bid, because this was a study, one of its kind. It will take a long time, I think, to do a similar study, given the scope of the study. So this, why did we go through all this trouble? Because when we look at values, I know a lot of people like doing surveys, quantitative surveys. And let me first of all admit my bias. I'm a qualitative researcher, I'm an anthropologist. So I definitely, given my training, and not only my training, my aptitude, because I'm more of an empathetic kind of a person, which goes very well with qualitative kinds of methodologies. I find that, yes, numbers are important, but if you're going to look at values, because values are intangible, then we really need to look at the qualitative aspects of research. How do we get that? How do we capture the feelings? You know, the surveys will tell you what people want you to hear. Of course, you put in checks and balances to reduce biases. Let me give one example of that. In the survey, we asked teachers, which of the values of the Kenyan Constitution do you teach in the classroom? And we singled out the most common values that is actually embedded in the Kenyan Constitution. And 90%, over 90% of the teachers said, we teach all these values in the classroom. We teach them to our children. Then we asked the same question to the children. And it was very interesting, the results. Okay, there were values like respect, which they agreed with the teachers. The values relating to the environment, they agreed with the teachers. When it came to gender equality, you find a divergence from the teachers. By the time it gets to tolerance, you have 54% of the children saying, we are not taught tolerance. But there are many other values. I'm just taking the extreme one. So imagine 54% of the children said they were not taught tolerance, while 9% of the teachers said they don't teach tolerance. Now, that takes us to a different question. Can values be taught?
Sure.
You know, how do you?
Ahead.
I think, yes, we can teach values, but depends on what methodology you use to teach values.
Yes.
So that's the other example I'd like to give is the whole issue of corporal punishment. And if you just go to, in fact, I saw internal research that was done by the Ministry of Education on child-friendly schools. They were monitoring child-friendly schools. This is child-friendly schools is a concept that's supported by UNICEF. And there's certain elements which I don't want to go in there, but one of the elements definitely is an environment where children are protected. And child-friendly schools definitely, emphatically discourage corporal punishment. So this survey an internal survey that the ministry did, and they went around asking the school heads and teachers about, to what extent have they implemented child-friendly schools and corporal punishment, and all of them are saying, oh, it was like, you would think our schools are heaven if you read the report, because they only use that one method. Yes. So obviously you have teachers are thinking, oh, this is our employer coming to ask us, do we do the right thing? So they all said yes. I mean, not all, but more than 90% said yes. Yes. Now, if you take that same question and in the survey we asked it, I can't at this moment remember the exact percentage, but a high percentage of teachers said they don't use corporal punishment. Again, you look at the children and the response is different. But remember, this was children who were the leaders, the school leaders. Yes. So the gap was there, but not that wide a gap as one would expect. Yes. Now, when we go to the schools, the first thing we see in the head teacher's office you see a cane. You go to the classroom. I remember in one classroom, we were passing by, and then a child looks up and tells the teacher, "Hey, they're passing by. Don't use the cane now." So you can see now how the kind of methods you use will definitely influences the kind of what you see and the responses you get. And by the end of the 1 week, the teachers would tell us, we have to be honest. We use the cane. We use. So actually, when we did the in-depth case studies, out of the 25 schools, 23 primary and 2 post-primary, there was only one where we saw the cane was not being used. And in fact, the teachers in that school, that was the secondary school, teachers in the school were complaining about the Mother Superior. She does not let us use the cane. She said, okay, why would you want to use the cane? So that we can save time. Save time to do what? So they can learn faster. Learn what faster? Can they learn through the cane? So it's like cramming. We're wasting time when we explain things to the kids. We're not able to cover the curriculum. Those kind of the reasons. And I'm not saying the teachers, if you talk to them, they'll give you very good reasons why they use. I may not agree with those reasons, but they have their own logic. So that is, I'm giving you this example, show you the difference between when we use different methodologies. At the end of the day, the research should be able to do what we call triangulate data from different informants and respondents, different sources and different places, because the study we did was, and the study, not only this particular one, but also the other ones that we've done, and I still do, have usually multi-locale, multi-site, with multiple sources of information. So we're able to triangulate them and see what is the pattern that's emerging. Is there a convergence or is there a divergence? Like I just said, there was a divergence from the survey and compared to what we saw on the ground. And but then also using our research from other research, because we have children. I remember another study that we did on what we call positive deviance study, where I remember this child who was saying, they can beat us, but do they have to beat us like donkeys? Like the children are like, it's okay to beat us, but do they have to beat us like donkeys? Which is like really beating children very hard. And I think that's what the problem is. So when you beat children to that extent, and you see violence outside in society, what do the children learn? Are they learning positive values or negative values? Because the same children who are school leaders, they also actually use the cane on their peers, because they're allowed to do it. They're not allowed by school regulations, but in practice, that is what's happening. So what are they learning? They're learning that we deal with our problems through use of violence, and which is not a positive value. So, you know me, I can go on and on talking about this.
I have enjoyed listening, and we have learned a lot. And you've almost preempted my next question, which was I wanted to ask you to highlight some of the key findings that relate to your research on values.
Okay, I will talk about not only the national study, because there are a number of other studies that I've done on values, directly or indirectly. So maybe I'll just give you some summarized findings. So I think one of the things is, from the research, or my conclusions from the research, is there are lots of missed opportunities.
Yes.
What do I mean by that? And I'll talk about 3 things. In our schools, we compartmentalize life like we do in real life. We compartmentalize, for example, you have the children's, you have lots of clubs, Kenyan schools, and in the region, not only in Kenya, even in Uganda, where I worked for a long time, they have clubs, children's clubs. Now, there's a lot of learning that goes on in these clubs. They have human rights clubs, they have transparency clubs, they have girls' education clubs. I mean, you think of it and there's a club for it. So there's a lot of learning in these clubs. But sadly, what is happening in may I use the word mainstream of the school, which is the academic part of it, in the classrooms, what they learn in these clubs may not necessarily move seamlessly into what the learning and augment the learning in the classroom. Let me give you one example of this. In one of the schools that we went to in the coast province.
Yes.
So they had this club where this is a club on child rights, and this club, they taught the children about the Convention on the Rights of the Child and what are the rights of the child and so on and so forth. And this club had very strict rules that that you could not violate, you cannot fight with each other, you cannot beat each other to instill discipline and that kind of thing. And this little kid, very bright young man, who came from a very disadvantaged background, he held some high position within the Child Rights Club. And I remember I talked to him and I said, okay, tell me what you do. Then he told me about the Convention of the Rights of the Child. And I can't remember all the rights, but he could just tell me offhand all the rights. This boy was also, I think he was a deputy governor in his school, the children's government in that one.
Yes, yes.
And so when I was talking to him, what do you do? And then it came out that he actually also uses the stick to instill discipline on the other children, and that the teachers also use the cane. So I asked him, but aren't you violating the rights of the child? He said, yes, but you see, that is in our club. That does not apply to the school. You can see the irony there. So here they're learning about it and they're practicing it, but there's a conflict between the club and the school, because the school, as much as the government policy says you don't use corporal punishment, it's actually made illegal by the Kenyan Constitution and the Education Act, though there were policy directives even before then. But he said, it's fine. This is a school, so we have to be beaten in the school, but not in the club. So there's always this conflict. So that is one of the things under missed opportunities, that and even within, actually, so that is one. Compartmentalization also takes place between one subject and another. The learning from one subject doesn't get into the other. And like, for example, if you have literature, where there are many, in literature, you can talk about, human rights as well, equality and all those things, and tolerant. You learn those values, but then you go to another class and those values are negated. Or even in that same class, the teacher is saying one thing and doing another thing. And it's very interesting when the children will tell you, today the teacher, madam, was very curly. She must have had quarreled with her husband at home. You know the way the children talk. So the teachers are bringing the baggage from outside to inside. And in the context of values, what does that mean? We are not role modeling the values that we claim to be teaching the children. So that is very important. So there's the issue of compartmentalization, and that is linked to the issue of critical capacity gaps. Because sometimes teachers will tell you, the thing is, you people, you come and tell us we should not be using the cane. But have you told us what else we can do not to use the cane? What are the alternatives? We don't know how to apply positive disciplining. So there are critical capacity gaps and also in understanding of what values are.
Yes.
And then one of the things that's very striking under missed opportunities is there's a silence on pluralistic values, values that promote pluralism, diversity, tolerance. There's a huge gap. You remember when the children said, 54% of the children said we're not taught tolerance, because tolerance is a pluralistic value. But there's a gap, not only because of what the teachers said, because I forgot to mention, we also analyzed textbooks and examination papers. We found a resounding silence on some of these values, and that's a missed opportunity. Yet it's there in the Kenyan Constitution, and these values are there in the education policies. So that's one of the things, highlights from the research. Then, despite the fact that I've been a little bit negative about schools,
Yes.
We did find schools that are value-based to different degrees, not to the same extent. But these value-based schools we really found, not even in the research, when we did the research on value-based education. We stumbled onto them in a way when we're doing the research on positive deviance. And you might be wondering, what is positive deviance?
Yeah. Please delve us into it.
Yes. So positive deviance is, let's say in a community, you go to a community and there are certain individuals or certain institutions that are rising above the norm within that community. They're deviating from that norm of what happens, the practices, and they're doing things that are very positive, despite all that challenges around. In the case of schools, we could say that there's, in the positive deviance studies, we looked at, I mentioned to you earlier, and you're aware of it, and many places in the world, examinations are used as a parameter for measuring success, right?
Yes.
So we looked at those districts or counties which were performing below the national average in the primary school leaving exams. Kenya has a system which is going to be phased out, but right now we still have a system where children do national exams at the end of 8 years of primary education.
Yes.
And this, so the schools, not only the schools, but the districts that were performing below the national average. Then we went to those counties, and then we looked at the schools within those, in the local areas, whether they're sub-counties or zones, because they're broken down into smaller units. Are there schools that are actually performing better than the others? And these are public schools. They all have the same resources. They start off with the same resources, support from the national government. So we went to those schools to find out, what is it that makes them tick? What is it that drives them to do better than others? And this is what we found. And if you have time, I would like to share
Please
that.
do. Yeah.
So we found that one thing is the school leadership. Okay, it's a common sense. Yes, school leadership. We all know good leadership can produce good results. But we looked a little bit deeper than that. It's not only the individual leader. It is whether that leader is able to inspire the others, the teachers, the community. Because one of the things we have in many parts of the world, again, where there's a big conflict between the school and the community, the school and the parents. The parents will always criticize the school, and the school will say, these parents are so difficult, they're so bad. They never support us.
Yes.
But we found that the schools that succeed with the good leadership, that these are schools that succeed both academically and otherwise, despite all the odds. The schools that target the development of the whole child, not just the academic part, but the development of the whole child. The schools recognize that not all children are the same, they have different abilities. Many schools just focus on the academics, so children with disabilities, which is an area of interest for you, specialization for you, these schools will look at children with different abilities, and it's really a joy to see some of the schools. The schools that actually seek out the troubled and the excluded child. And if I may give one example here, there was a case of this school, well, actually more than one school, but this particular school is the more dramatic example. This, I remember I talked about the children's government. The school, the children's government leaders are elected the same way as national elections, where they have campaigns and whatever. So this child ran a very strong campaign and was elected to be the president of the school. This is standard 8, I think. 7, 8. Now, the head teacher, who was very inclusive kind of a person, and he had his ears on the ground, and he found out that this child won the elections because he was brewing changa at home. Changa is a local brew. He came from a single family home with his mother, and the reality is, as much as changa is like it's an illicit brew, the reality on the ground is many families, especially single-headed households, where they survive on the proceeds of brewing chana. And this is what even sends the children to school. But now what this child had done is had taken advantage of that to give a few free drinks here and there, especially to the boys. So now the head teacher was in a fix. What do I do? Do I expel the child? Because that is something that can get the child suspended, right? It's taken very seriously as a serious offense. So what he did not expel the child. He stripped him of his presidency, but he mentored him. He kept the child. He was a bright child. Despite the odds, he was doing well. He mentored him, and he passed his primary school exam well enough to go to secondary school. He qualified for a secondary school. The story didn't end very well for this child because the mentoring was not continued at the secondary level. Because when it's about values and given the kind of environment somebody lives in, that mentoring has to be reinforced. That in secondary it did not happen, but at least in primary, the boy was helped and not excluded. So that's a head teacher who really goes out of his way to help a troubled, excluded child. And there have been other better examples I could have taken from the other schools, but we don't have the time for that right now. And then, of course, these are schools that are able to nurture positive values. So this is the profile of the schools that I would say are value-based schools, and we found examples of those on the ground to varying degrees. And then the other thing I'd like to point out are what are the qualities of these value-based teachers, head teachers and teachers. And you find the head teachers in these schools, I'll just read them out for you.
Yes,
They're instructional as well as administrative leaders. They encourage initiative and innovation. So they don't punish children for being innovative, but they encourage that, which means they're also able to attract the children's attention, keep the children's attention, because they are looking at what they can do and not what they can't do. They're inclusive, as the example I've given. They're impartial. They seem to be very fair. And I'm not promoting corporal punishment. I'm totally against it. But the children will say, yeah, they beat. But you know, when he has done that, or the teacher, they have done in a fair way, which means the children does not see themselves being victimized in that case. They're warm and welcoming. You can go to these schools. They don't suddenly run to close the doors on you. They welcome you. In fact, they have an open door policy for teachers and for visitors. They're focused and they're results oriented. They recognize and build on the differences in children. I think I've talked about that. And they effectively role model positive behavior and inspire teachers to do the same. Of course, we must remember they're not saints. We're all human beings. But in general, they try to model the behavior that they want the children to learn and they want the teachers to follow. And there were many cases we found where a good, charismatic leader was able to change the culture of the school, the culture of teachers coming to school late, not through threats, but because they would feel uncomfortable. Oh gosh, in this school, everybody's coming to class on time, coming to school on time. So I better start doing that. You know, the social pressure that forms when everybody is behaving in a certain way. And then the communities also support that. They see a teacher just, it's supposed to be school hours and the teacher is out there playing pool or something, or a child is out there in a video kiosk or something, watching videos. The community themselves bring the children to the school for the school to take action. So I can give very many examples of these kind of schools that we found in our through the various research, but we also saw, in addition, that some of the defining qualities of the school leaders, that also including teachers and school admin, is they are creative, they're critical thinkers, and they promote these values. They're compassionate and empathetic, they're committed, they delegate responsibilities to others, they're not controlling, but there's discipline, and they're determined and they're very, very resilient. So I don't know whether you want me to talk about the school. I think I've mentioned it already, so I will just repeat it, but in a different way. The good practices is being able to give children a second chance.
Yes.
And even to give teachers a second chance by respect and valuing them.
Yes.
They're making sure everybody counts. So that's being inclusive. Inclusivity is very, very strong. And we had also good practices that demonstrated that though some schools don't have resources more than others, parents are very poor, the school leaders would actively go out, network, and mobilize resources from the private sector, from parents. Like some schools, like, uniform. Kenya, uniforms are compulsory. Schools, if a child comes to school without proper uniform, they can be expelled. These schools don't do that. But what they've tried to do in some of the schools is they have what they call a uniform bank. So when a child leaves the school, they ask the parents, they ask the children, who then tell the parents, I would like to donate my uniform, or they've outgrown the uniform, donate the uniform to the school uniform bank. Then the school can take this uniform, wash it, whatever. Then they give that uniform to a needy child, but they don't tell anybody who that child is.
Yes.
Because of stigmatizing and labeling. So you see, they're very, very sensitive about the self-esteem of children. So they don't do anything that can harm the child. Even Some of these schools have successful school feeding programs.
Yes.
And like there was one school, the very next school didn't have a program. They had, but they were not successful. But this school, the ones that we are saying is value-based, had
Yes.
a successful program. So we asked the head teacher, and the way they do it is by being inclusive, involving the parents.
Yes.
Through use of technology, through which they do a lot in international private schools, but public schools through use of WhatsApp, they involve and they make the school feeding program, at least in the cases that we saw, was an initiative of the parents themselves. So once it's their initiative, it doesn't become, oh, they're trying to bother us with paying more money.
Yes.
School just want to take money from us, and we don't have. They bring what they can. Like in one school we saw, because they're a very poor community of subsistence farmers, so the parents would bring the equivalent in, whether it's maize, whether it's cassava, they would bring, instead of giving money, they would bring in kind contributions. So there's so many examples like those that one can give. So as much as we found a lot of negative values, but we also found positive values that underpinned the practices in schools and head teachers and teachers. And the most important is they were able to transform the school culture, because it's easier for a charismatic head teacher to come and change the school. After the head teacher goes, everything collapses, right? Because that
Yes.
leadership is not there. But they do it in a way that you change the structures, you change the mindset of the teachers and the communities, then the chances of this sustaining beyond the life of that one head teacher is greater. So I can go on, but I think you I'll stop here.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you very much, Daktari. I realized that your study generated a lot of findings, and actually very interesting findings. And I think after this, I would be very interested to look at them further. But I'm wondering then, what are the implications? What are the implications of such findings to the children's right to education, through education, and in education?
I think the thing about education, formal education,
Yes.
because we have also the informal education that's going outside in the playground. It's going on in the home and the family.
Yes.
I firmly believe that, yes, the community is very, very important. And to bring the community on board for sustainability is very important. But I also believe that schools have the power to change mindsets, depending on how they do it. If they do it with a lot of love and empathy and commitment, then they can change. It could be a slower process, but they can. And nothing succeeds as success. So if you have a school that is able to change, let me give a small example, not from this study, but from some monitoring that I was doing in Uganda on early childhood, and talking to the parents to see whether the community-based early childhood that UNICEF was supporting the government of Uganda to implement, whether what was the impact? What was the impact? And sometimes the small little things that tell you impact. And I remember talking to this parent, and she was very happy. She was, this is in the context of IDPs, internally displaced persons, camp. It was in a camp.
Yes.
And the mother told me, you know what? This child, early childhood, you're talking about 3, 4, 5-year-olds, right? Now she comes home and she insists she cannot eat food unless her hand has been washed. So if I tell her, oh, whatever, she'll say, no, you have to wash your hands and I have to wash my hands before I eat. And that's a very powerful message that this child is taking back home. And the
Yes.
child's mindset is being changed to acquire good practices, which, if we had all done this, with the COVID-19 pandemic, that's one of
Yes.
the things, hand washing.
Thank you for
So,
bringing it in. Thank you.
so, so you see the impact that a school, an early childhood center or a primary school in particular, can have on changing values through education. Because
Yes.
school has the power, the head teacher has the power. I firmly believe that. And we can change things, not say, oh, we don't have this resource, we don't. Yes, teachers need to be well paid, teachers need to be respected, and teachers need to be given the resources. But even with the limited resources you have, you can still change things within the school without it even being a boarding school. I went to day school myself. So even day schools can do that, bring about that change. Now, what are the implications for the children themselves? Of course, acquiring good values and habits
Yes.
through school, through the school learning. But even for the school itself, you'll have better disciplined children because these are children who will do the right thing because it's the right thing to do.
Yes.
That quote is not; those are not my words. I picked it from one of the curriculum, KICD curriculum framework.
Yes.
That children who will do the right thing because it is the right thing to do. And if we are able to do that, imagine all the school violence that we have there. Years, schools are being burnt down, schools are being vandalized, children who are unruly, children during school holidays, they're sneaking out to drink alcohol, though they're underage. And even if you're overage, drink yourself silly. And there's so many things can be solved. I'm not saying it will be heaven, but a lot of these can change. So the children will benefit. And there's also research that shows that in the schools that are value-based, the children also perform better academically. And those who don't, you discover their strengths so they can be channeled in the right direction. Because not everybody is good in academics, right? Because people have different aptitudes. So you're able to discover their abilities. So to me, in a very briefly, I can say it's a win-win situation. The children benefit, the teachers benefit, the head teachers benefit, they get the promotions, they get the bonuses, but the communities also benefit from it. We can't change the whole community, of course, but by bringing more and more parents in and getting them to support the school and their children, the realization I'm supporting the child because it's my child. And if my child does well, it's good for all of us, but not in negative ways, but positive ways. Yeah, I hope I've answered your question.
You have, Dr. Sheila. Thank you very much. Uh, we're coming to the end of our interview, and I wouldn't want us to go off before I actually get your final thoughts about values, the rights, and everything about education.
I think
Conclude on that note.
I would like to maybe in closing, I
Yes,
would like
please.
to repeat what I've said in other fora.
Yes.
That is, education without values,
Mm.
just like science without ethics, can be very dangerous, destructive, and it is not sustainable. So to say that to teach values, I'll use the word teach values in the right way takes too long or is too expensive. I think it's more expensive not to teach values the right way. Because otherwise, if we don't do that, what we are doing is we're promoting cultures of violence, cultures of corruption, cultures of cheating, because if we have the right values, we won't do all those things. And we can convince others. I'd also like to say that as development workers, educationists, we need to recognize when we talk about quality education, we should not only think about knowledge and skills. We must put values at the core of quality education, into the definition of quality education. Because what is quality education? Is it only about getting marks? Is it only being able to construct something? If you don't have values, those things will come crumbling down. It may not affect you because you've gotten your money and gone away, but eventually it will catch up and you would have destroyed so many other lives. So we must put values. We must give emphasis to values right from the early years. We should not try to teach values through cramming. What does values mean? How do you define respect? No. We must do values. We must practice values. We must model values. And we can do that also by opening up our minds to being creative and critical thinking skills, and looking at the holistic development of the child, the transformation of the school itself, which then can also contribute to the transformation of society in a sustainable way. I think those are my last words. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sheila, for giving me the pleasure to interview you. I've learned and I've enjoyed myself. On this note, I would like to go off. Thank you very much for the time we spent together.
Thank you
and I
so
hope
much.
our viewers have learned. Thank you.
Thank you for your patience as well. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.